Yeah. Good morning, dear educators. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of Ethos Foundation, in association with the Rainmatter Foundation, we are delighted to welcome you to Master Speaker 4. This series grew out of our ongoing efforts and conversations with faculty across institutions, listening to challenges, questions, and aspirations for teaching. One thing emerged clearly: there is a need for a space that supports educators, encourages reflection, and brings in voices that can deepen academic practice. That intention is what shaped the series. Before we dive into our first session, I would like to briefly outline the format for today. So we will be having the lectures, which will be presented by our experts. Then we'll be having a Q&A round. And then it will be followed by a workshop led by Professor Amit. Participants can post their questions in the chat box in between the sessions as well, as and when you feel like there is something that you would like to clarify. To help us bridge the gap between classroom practice and academic publishing, we are joined today by three remarkable experts who will guide us through the conceptual and technical nuances of the research journey. Our first session focuses on the what and the how of research. Many of us have incredible experiments that we've conducted, or we might even have a rich pool of data, but we often struggle to convert them to research. To help us navigate this, we have Professor Amit Srivastava with us. May I request Professor Manju to introduce the speaker?
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Amit Srivastava. Dr. Amit Srivastava is the Director, India, for the Center of Asian and Middle Eastern Architecture, CAMEA, based at the University of Adelaide in Australia. Having trained and practiced as an architect in India, Srivastava's primary work focused on the architectural and construction histories of colonial and postcolonial India. His other current researches focus on the themes of transnational exchange of materials, skills, and construction processes across the Indian Ocean world, from Africa and the Middle East to Southeast Asia and Australia, with special interest in cases of South-to-South cooperation. He is also working on a project looking at Australian architects in Asia and its impact on the material culture in Australia. I now request Professor Amit Srivastava to take over the session, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I will start by sharing my slides. So hopefully that is visible.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session. And thanks to everyone at Ethos Foundation for inviting me. As you've already heard, I'm based at Adelaide University in Australia, where I run a research center called CAMEA. But I also direct a research society called Patio here in India, which helps with early career researchers, but we can talk about that a little bit later. When I was asked to do this lecture, it's a pretty broad range of audience, and it's a pretty broad topic to cover. So I was thinking, well, I can't really give you a complete technical insight into methodologies, but what I'm here to share is a few thoughts on architectural research. I have no intention of making this a comprehensive methods lecture, but I'm trying to touch upon a few points that remain sort of main points of confusion, whether it's methodology or literature review or theoretical framework that a lot of people struggle with even through their research journeys. And I will share some insights that might assist you in trying to make sense of all of this and putting it as part of your process. But before we get there, I wanted to acknowledge something. Like before you came here today, we've already requested you to do a little bit of thinking and identify either a moment in a project that surprised you or a question that you've been carrying around for a while without quite resolving it. We deliberately kind of asked you to do that to point out that the sort of seeds of research inquiry are already part of your life as a designer. And we want to sort of start by saying that if you've ever completed a design project, you kind of already know how to do research. It might have different names or processes, so it's a slightly different process, but it's ultimately the same thing. So let's think about a simple architectural project and the steps in what we call design thinking. You start with trying to understand who you're designing for and go through the phase of an expanded or divergent inquiry, where you look at the site, the climatic context, and the stakeholders. and gather as much information as possible. You then go through a process of interpreting what information you have gathered and maybe iterate different solutions in what is a convergent phase before then getting some feedback and going through another phase of iteration. So we're kind of used to this process, and I want to use that as a way to get you started thinking about how you can leverage that into a research process. Even if you're using a sort of more complex model of design process, you might note that the iterative phase might simply be understood as an experimental phase where you go back over the problem again and again to maybe revise your hypothesis or understanding of the problem before you then enter into prototyping or an exploratory phase where you're using user feedback. But regardless of the exact sort of process you use, it is reasonable to say that we all start with building and understanding, and it's a very common term, context. It is a very important word, context. It's used a lot in architecture because ultimately the process of building this understanding of context is really what research is about. So we're probably taught to think about context in fairly direct terms like physical context of topography or climate or built fabric, or the social context of history of a place or the community, or even regulatory context that we deal with, whether it's planning rules or building codes. And these are all legitimate and important. But I want to suggest is that there is another layer to this context that is worth reaching for. I was in a lecture, this was only a few weeks ago in Ahmedabad, where architect Rahul Mehrotra was presenting some work. And he used a phrase that I like very much. And he said, as practitioners, we need to understand not only context, but the context of context. So I really like that sort of way of phrasing what that bigger picture is. And what this means is that we need to recognize that the forces shaping any given place or problem are themselves shaped by larger systems. And those larger systems have their own logics and their own rules. And I think this is an important mindset that we have to get to. So if we limit ourselves to the immediate context, we might be missing on those deeper patterns. So we, of course, need to be a bit more curious, but the idea of context can simply take us from the frame of sort of design intuition into the world of research thinking. It's very much simple that way. So we don't need to complicate what we already do as designers. We are simply shifting to a slightly wider lens to understand that world that we work within. So I'm going to start with an example of what the widening lens feels like. I'm sure all of you have been stuck in a traffic jam at some point, and your obvious expectation is that there would be some accident or roadworks or a broken down vehicle that is causing the jam. But after several minutes of sort of inching forward slowly, suddenly the traffic starts moving and you continue along and discover that there is nothing there, no accident, no roadwork, nothing. Everything is completely clear. And so what's going on here? And I think it is a perfect example about the difference of individual and system behavior. Okay. What started the jam, as we kind of know now, was maybe one driver pumping their brakes for just a second to avoid a minor issue. And at that individual level, it seems perfectly reasonable and almost innocuous. But what it does is it starts a chain reaction where each subsequent driver now needs to pump their brakes for progressively longer times. And the cumulative effect of all this inconsequential action is that something nobody expected, like this phantom traffic jam that travels backwards through the entire road like a wave. Now, studies show that at this level, the overall traffic behaves according to the mathematics of fluid dynamics, not as a collection of individual actions, but as a complete system, which operates by its own logic that is simply invisible at the level of the individual car. So why are we talking about traffic jams? This recognition that systems behave by a different logic than individual cases matters a lot. It matters a lot in how we think about the built environment, buildings and small design decisions. No matter how small they kind of feel, they exist within cities and economies and other larger social systems. And those systems have certain emergent behaviors that no individual decision can fully explain. I want to continue with that line of thinking for a little bit longer and bring in another example. So you might have heard of the game theory thought experiment called the prisoner's dilemma. and where those two people are arrested and held separately, and each is offered a deal if they betray the other person. So for each person, there are three options. If they both support each other and stay silent, then details are harder to prove and they both get smaller sentences. If they both betray each other, they both serve medium sentences. And if only one betrays the other, then that person goes free and the other serves a long sentence. Logically, to serve your best interest, the rational choice, in this context, is always to betray the other, because whatever the other person does, you're always better off individually with a shorter sentence or going free altogether. But we also know through studies that at the level of the collective outcome of this approach is worse for everybody. And at the level of the system, cooperation works better, even if betrayal works better at an individual level. So it seems counterintuitive. So the point I'm trying to make, that this is not about morality or rules or how we should approach things. It is about recognizing that systems behave differently. And in that sense, research, I think, is primarily about what we call is systems thinking. The point I want to make here is that understanding that context, really understanding it, requires us to read things at multiple levels simultaneously, and the context of context. And for this, we need information, not just anecdotal observation or impressions or intuitions, but actual organized and structured information that will allow us to see patterns that are not available at the individual level. So this is where research becomes not just useful, but necessary. And if we can approach whatever we're trying to do from this perspective, all the other challenging terms that we've got kind of fit into place. Being able to see the patterns allow us to model and eventually predict system behavior. And the more information we collect, the more obvious the pattern of the system will become. But it requires us to step away from the comfort of the immediate experience and look at the aggregate of many instances to reveal this pattern. And this is, a lot of people find that challenging, because you might experience something individually and might think, oh, that's an interesting observation, but then you don't really know how to take it further from there and make it into a research pattern. So you might see an approach to building or construction or something that you think is, interesting, as we've kind of asked you to do in your sort of pre-session thinking, but how do you then make it into a research project? So ultimately, we will be able to compile those patterns into a theory that can help predict future behavior, but I'll come back to the issue of theory later. For now, what I'm asking you to do is shift your orientation to seek answers for what that is, the context of context. The research question in that sense is not just sitting there to be discovered through observation, so just because you've observed something interesting that a research question will come out of it. Now that you've observed something, you need to construct the question by asking again and again, what system is this observation a part of, and what system is that system a part of, moving from the individual instance to the pattern and then more patterns. But of course, to build that aggregation of information, we need a lot of information, or what is sometimes also called data. Now, these two words are sort of deeply connected, but they're not exactly synonymous. Data is information, but not all information is data, or at least not usable data in any sense. So information is everywhere. It is the stuff of your sort of daily observation and experience. But in terms of research, this information needs to be methodically collected and organized and framed to become research data. And again, this is a place where a lot of people have trouble, because they often think that a simple linear process of collecting information and then analyzing them is the way to go, which is why they often spend a lot of time on sort of field trips and archives, doing a lot of legwork, putting in all that effort and collecting all the information, only to find that that information does not reveal any worthwhile pattern. So you're like, well, I've put in all this work. How do I make this into a paper, or how do I sort of take it out into the world? And I'm sure many of you have gone through that kind of frustration where you've got material, but you don't know what to do with it. It is important to understand that often things work the other way. You already have an understanding of what a meaningful process is, and then you observe something unexpected, something that doesn't fit. And that piece of information generates a question leading to collection of more relevant data. So what is important is to realize that relationship between the two things, the information and its meaning. So without that, each in itself is not particularly useful. So all the observation and all the processes of meaning, are not taking place in a vacuum. All of this is taking place inside a world that already has structures, languages, and categories. And all of this has existed well before you and I came along and asked our question. So others have been there before you, and they have left behind a landscape of ideas, arguments, and concepts that you're inevitably working within, whether you're able to acknowledge it or not. So clearest illustration, that's why I've got that in some big pink, contextual writing there, is the idea of language itself. When you write about your research, you use words that are not yours. They existed long before you arrived and carry meanings, associations, and histories that you didn't choose, but that nevertheless shape what you're able to say and how you'll be understood within that language. For instance, as we know, through reading a lot of architectural research, the word sustainability or place, means something quite specific in architectural discourse right now. And somebody who doesn't know that might use these words in a very different way. So if you use those words, you are entering a conversation that's already in progress with its own history and its own stakes. But all of this is not necessarily a problem. I'm not trying to sort of say, oh my God, you've got to get your head around all of this stuff before you can do research. I think ultimately it's enormously useful because it means you're not starting from scratch. There's already a community of people thinking about the things related to what you care about. Your challenge is to actually find that community. They've already developed a language and they've refined questions and they've already mapped out part of the territory that you now might be entering at a later stage. So anything you say now will only make sense in relation to these ideas that already exist. And this is the essence of where, and all of this sort of background is important to understand what we then end up classifying as a literature review. So literature review, very simply, is the process of discovering, not just going and reading a lot of stuff, but it's a process of discovering methodically this existing landscape of ideas and concepts that you already wish to contribute to because you're interested in the topic. So if you do any bit of reading to understand a concept, you're already conducting a kind of literature review, but not all literature review is the same either. What we often start with, when you're just sort of doing initial collection, can be termed what we call a scoping review. This is the sort of first stage where you're getting a sense of the landscape, but are not trying to capture everything. You're just trying to understand what is the current conversation about, where do the boundaries of the territory seem to lie, and soon you will need to be more comprehensive and try to capture everything that has been said. And that seems daunting. How do you even begin to get a sense of what is everything? But thankfully, there is a process for that, and you can do that through a few steps and what we call developing a systematic literature review. So one simple thing to learn here is how to get better at using search engines. We live in fantastic times and all the knowledge of the world is at your fingertips, but you just need to know what and how to search for. For this, we use things like keywords and search strings, and academic literature is organized around keywords, which are terms that the research community has already agreed to use. And you don't need to understand or agree with those terms. You just need to know how to use them to make a search string. And to do that, you need to use Boolean operators. And again, this is not a lecture where I'm trying to give you all the details, but I'm really quickly trying to touch on a few things, which will be a good starting point if you haven't quite done it, and will give you a much better sense of how to come to terms with the scope of the research. So Boolean operators like or, and, not, they let you combine keywords into a search string, as you can see on the right there. And then you can use that to search through databases, and it helps the database give you exactly what you're looking for. So you need to systematically understand what keywords and synonyms and truncated versions you need to just use to describe what you're looking for. And this takes a little bit of time, but I think this is a worthwhile thing to do. You need to perform these searches across multiple databases that you can see on the bottom there on the right to make sure you capture everything. And I'll talk about the everything in just a second. But ultimately, what you want is all the things relevant to your topic that might have been recurred across a period of time or in a particular language. I cannot iterate the importance of this process. And the one thing I will say, if you have a librarian at your institution, please speak to them. They're a fantastic resource. and many researchers fail to use them properly, they will always be able to help you develop a good search string. And this is something my PhD students do all the time, is that we develop a thing and then they go to the library and they help reformat that. Of course, to design a proper search string, you need to define the boundaries of what you're trying to research. And here I want to share a trick that I use, which I found to be very useful. I use this, as you can see on the screen, a 3-part Venn diagram. The first circle represents the architectural issue or challenge that I'm working with. So I kind of try to define what exactly is the architectural issue that I want to deal with. And then inevitably, the answer will be connected to something that is outside the immediate scope of architecture. And so the second circle represents the extradisciplinary domain, whether it is psychology, sociology, engineering, whatever it is, where you're kind of trying to use to understand the architectural issue. And the third circle is a bit more flexible. We're going to engage with a specific method or process, or if I've looked at some case studies that I think are really valuable, I kind of bring them into it, and that will help define the study further. And like we talked about in the beginning about your surprising observation as a starting point. And this is where something like that might be placed as a way of trying to find that interaction or overlap between the architectural and extradisciplinary knowledge. Anyway, what you're aiming for is a situation where some research already exists at the overlap of the 3 pairs of circles, but nothing exists at the intersection of all 3. And this is important, that differentiation, because what it shows is that there are people already writing at the overlap of your architectural and extradisciplinary interests and using the cases or the methods, but no one has yet written at the overlap of all 3. And that intersection is your research territory, and that is where your contribution will be. Now, not everybody uses this. This is a simple trick. It helps my students visualize exactly how to find what in often research terms we call defining the gap, right? So this exercise tells you something very important, I think. You're not working in a vacuum, and no one has yet understood the thing that you're specifically chasing. And it's important to know that. And I know the literature review seems like a daunting task to do, but it's absolutely worth the effort to get this clarity in terms of where your research lies. And it's important to understand that if you work here in that little triangle there, you can truly be offering an original contribution. And if you're doing the search and you find that there's a lot of work that already exists at that intersection, then you simply redefine your question and narrow your focus. And it's a common thing PhD supervisors always say, oh, your research is too broad, narrow it. But students don't really know how to narrow it. And I think this is a fantastic trick to do that. But on the other hand, like if the 3-way intersection is empty, which is great, but there's also no work in the 2-way overlaps, that is also problematic, because that means that the topic might be too specific and you will struggle to say something meaningful at the end. So once we know what we are looking for, we now want to learn everything that has ever been written at these 2-way overlaps, the pink bits that you can see on there on the screen. When you talk about trying to find out everything that's been written about something, that's a daunting term. And how could students get really stressed about this? How could you expect me to read everything that's written on this topic? But the thing is, it's easier than you think. There are systematic literature review protocols. If you follow it, you'll realize that you might start with a total search result. Like if you do first search result in databases, there'll be several thousand papers. But you're not expected to read all of them. Once you remove the duplicates, look through the titles to find the most relevant ones, you will already be down to a few hundred. And then going through the abstracts, you might reject certain types of cases or methods, and that will further come down to less than 100 papers that you kind of have to read. And then upon first reading, you might only leave you with maybe 30, 50, 60 papers that are directly relevant. And the interesting thing is you don't really have to now, this way in a fantastic time, is that there's new digital tools that are available every day to help you with this kind of sorting process. So you're only reading the most relevant handful of papers. And yet, because you've gone through this process, you can be sure that you've found and read everything on that topic. And I think this is important, not because you will get useful information and citations, but what you're looking for, apart from the general understanding of the topics, is also valuable. So there's a difference between reading for information and reading the literature as a complete body of work. When you read the literature as a whole, as a set rather than a collection of sort of individual pieces, something different sort of emerges. You begin to see patterns that no single paper contains. You notice where the agreements are and where the fault lines are. The places where researchers disagree, where the evidence pulls in different direction. Okay. But you also notice what is conspicuously absent, the questions nobody seems to be asking, or the assumption that everybody shares within their work. So these absences are often just as interesting as what is present. It is the same shift in scale they were talking about with that sort of traffic jam. And I think I find a lot of time research students find that problematic because they read something and they're looking for quotes and they read in a very utilitarian manner rather than trying to work with the whole body of literature. Reading at this level also has some really valuable sort of practical benefits as a researcher. The people writing in your territory are your people. And it's important to find them. They share your interest and they're asking those adjacent questions to the thing that you're interested in. Following their work is one of the most valuable things you can do as a researcher to begin with. Plus, all the journals and databases that you find these papers in are also exactly where you might one day want to publish, because clearly those places are interested in this topic that you are interested in. So a good literature review gives you a map of where your community lives. So you can find your community of researchers, and that's really important. Research can be quite isolating, so it's very important to kind of find other people who are interested and who are writing about these things. So a good literature review gives you a map. A good literature review gives you a map of where your community lives, but further it also teaches you the language of that community. We talked about it before. So how general terms acquire specific meanings in specific contexts. And this is something that you want to learn to be able to communicate. So if you are walking into a conversation using words in the wrong way, that creates unnecessary friction. And knowing the language that will make you easily accepted in the community, and that's important as well. And finally, as I've got there on the slide, reading the full set will reveal not just the content, but what theories and methods others have found useful in doing that type of research, which gives you a much clearer sense of the choices that are available to you when you start constructing your own research. So a literature review done properly is immensely helpful in helping you find your community, learn the language, and showing you the methodological tools available for your research project. And that brings me to the other problem of the idea of methods and methodology. There's often a confusion about these terms, even between experienced researchers, so I want to start by clarifying something. These words are not interchangeable. A method relates to a specific tool or technique that you use to achieve a specific objective. It relates to what you actually do in the research, whether it is conducting interviews or running a survey or making scientific observations or measurements, right? On the other hand, methodology is bigger and governs the overall logic of your approach. The assumption that govern why you choose your method and what that will lead to and how that will lead to into new knowledge. And the same method can be used in very different ways depending on the methodological framework. So for instance, an interview designed to capture experience is very different than an interview designed to test a hypothesis. To get some perspective on this, I would suggest this book called Architectural Research Methods by Linda Grote and David Wang, where they use a slightly different system and divide the research process into these three levels. At the broadest level are what they call systems of inquiry, the underlying philosophical assumptions about how knowledge works and how the world can be known. And under that sits strategies, what they call strategies, which are the broad approaches that you might use for a study. And under that comes tactics, which are the specific tools and techniques of research. This layering is very useful because it reminds you that every methodological choice you make is connected upwards to a bigger set of assumptions, whether you are aware of them or not. And when somebody is going to review your work, they are going to look and challenge those assumptions as well. So Their systems of inquiry are about a fairly simple set of questions about assumptions. And again, I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail. It's a small, short lecture. So I'm just giving you a whole broad set of things that we can talk about, or you can go explore further. So the kind of assumptions that we're looking about is things like, is there an objective reality that the researcher can discover? So, in a sort of world where we can have sort of objective truths, that is something that we can work with. But on the other hand, is it a reality that is partly constructed to the interpretation of researchers? So there is a whole subjective quality to that. So these kind of assumptions are built into the different types of strategies that you might use. So broadly, research in architecture and built environment sits somewhere on that spectrum between quantitative and qualitative approaches. And, very simply, quantitative research deals with sort of things like numbers, measurements, statistical relationships, things that are relatively objective in nature. And qualitative research kind of deals with subjective qualities of meaning and social constructions. And your research doesn't have to be one or the other. It will kind of fall somewhere in the spectrum and maybe use different methods in a mixed method context as well. But it's important to be aware of what body of assumptions you are choosing when you're choosing a particular method. So finally, Groth and Wang offer a useful map of main strategies or approaches, and there are 7 of them. I can't explain all of them in detail here, but again, I'll use a wonderful example to show you how the same topic of research can be affected by the strategy or approach of research you employ. So for that, let's consider one of the most fundamental elements in architecture, a window. If you just want to study a window and somebody wants to say, well, all right, I want to do a research on window. What does that mean? It seems quite straightforward, but that same window can be studied in these completely 7 different ways, as Groth and Wang show, each producing a different type of knowledge. So I'm going to really rush through a bunch of examples here. So the first study is what we call interpretive historical research. And that might be asking how windows have evolved over time, what they meant in different periods, or showing how changing technology has transformed their design. Here you would work with historical documents, and so you've got this particular set of data and evidence, drawings, photographs, and to produce this knowledge about meaning as it has developed over time. Right? The second is what they call qualitative research. This might be sitting with the person who inhabits a building and asking about their experience of the window, what they feel, how the light changes their sense of space, what are they looking out at. So this knowledge is sort of produced in a sort of rich and particular telling of something deep about what it is like to be in a relationship with this element of architecture. It's a qualitative research. The third is what they call correlational research, which is looking across a large number of cases to ask whether there is a measurable relationship between, let's say, the window size or orientation and, let's say, the well-being or productivity of occupants. So you're trying to see the relationship between one aspect of architecture and either the outcomes or effects or things that come out of that. So you're working with numbers and statistical relationships to find out what tends to go with what. So it's relational in that sense. The fourth is what we call experimental research, which is setting up a kind of controlled condition to test a specific hypothesis. So you want to sort of look at, let's say, window configurations, as you can see on the screen there, which are systematically measuring the effects of temperature or light levels depending on the different window type. And the knowledge produced is about, cause and effect, what causes what. So how does the shape of the window affect the amount of light or the amount of or the temperature or so on and so forth. The fifth is simulation. It is something, for those of you who are involved in computational stuff, is very common. So building a computation model and running it through scenarios, in this case as a window, you might be testing daylight performance or thermal behavior across different seasons. And the knowledge is, in this sense, predictive. So it's telling you what would happen under conditions that you haven't yet built. So they try to sort of project forward. The sixth is a logical argumentation, where they might be constructing a reasoned case, drawing on existing knowledge and theoretical positions about, let's say, the role windows play in architectural meaning, or as you can sort of see here, we're talking about Kim Dovey's sort of work in the constitution of spatial connections, So new empirical data is collected, and the knowledge produced is sort of conceptual and theoretical, looking at it through that particular lens of logic. And the seventh one they talk about, which is relatively common you will find in architectural research, is this kind of mixed method or case study research method, where you're selecting one building or a small number of buildings, or and studying the windows within them in depth and from multiple angles. The example I've seen here given here is understanding the veranda as this interstitial space, which is an extension of the window but not quite the outside just yet. And you're trying to generalize so you're trying to understand, you're not trying to generalize across this wide sample, but to understand this particular case in sort of richly, such that it gives you insights or illuminates other similar cases that might have existed in that particular kind of context. So different strategies and different tools or tactics, as you can see here, will allow you to ask different questions about the same case. So it's important to understand the community you belong to and the kind of frameworks you use, and not only by methods, but again, which is the other thing that we're going to talk about, which is theoretical framework. So theoretical framework is one of those things that make people very uncomfortable. Many years of sort of teaching, I've sort of seen, if you've got a room full of PhD students, you can mention theoretical framework and you can physically feel the room tighten slightly. And the reality is the researchers who do use it with great confidence are also not really clear what it is, even though they might have found one that works for them. Okay, so let's start by clarifying this one thing, that theory is not simply a fancy idea borrowed from a well-known thinker, which is what a lot of PhD students and researchers use it. Okay, what theory is this aligned with? I know this is how it's often used in sort of published research, and particularly in architecture, you'll find that someone identifies a concept from some big name theorists like Foucault, or Bourdieu, or Lefebvre, and then they drop in a paragraph that summarizes it and then uses it as a lens through which to describe their case material. It's a standard format of writing a paper, but that doesn't mean that they really understand what theory is or why they're using it. In this case, it simply sort of signals intellectual engagement. And I want to say it's worth understanding what a theory is and how it will help you find, the thing that I keep talking about, which is finding your research community. I think it's really important. So let's talk about theory, and, we all know really well, which is, the theory of gravity, for instance. So today, all of us know it as something we studied in school and possibly understand the law of attraction between bodies, even identifying that on Earth, this translates to 9.8 meters per second, all of that. But it's not something that someone thought up overnight in their head and came up with a theory. And also, it didn't come fully formed. So it's a good example of understanding how things formulate. So at some point, someone noticed an apple falling, as we know from the big story, and were surprised by it and recorded it as what you call a data point. And then they ask, well, it's an intelligent question in that sense, which might sound stupid now, but okay, apple falls, I know, but does an orange also do the same thing? And then you extend that question and then say, well, does a stone also do the same thing? And so on till you create a big enough data set, a big enough observational data set across different objects in different circumstances to then start defining a pattern. And then you recognize the pattern that things always fall to the ground. Right? You can't make that assumption just on looking at 2 things or 10 things. You've got to have a big enough sample data set to say that. So from this pattern, it becomes possible to then distill something that transcends any individual instance and stands an abstraction for all these instances, which is what we call a theory or a theory of gravity. So this allows us to understand the behavior of any falling object without having to observe every individual falling object from scratch. So you're using this, abstracting it and making a rule, which of course is questionable and challengeable, but it gives you a shorthand to talk about general instances that you don't every time have to show. Now that theory can then be tested through new experiments and new information and then added to strengthen it. So as you can see in this sort of thing on the slide, you then do the experiments of Galileo atop the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or Einstein's theory of gravitational distortion of the fabric of space-time. This is one long conversation where the abstraction of theory serves as that common thread. And this is what a theory does. It is a distillation and abstraction of empirical data, and it's important to understand that. But it allows you to understand many instances without invoking each one individually. So a theory is not a thought or an idea or a hunch or even a hypothesis, which is what a lot of students confuse it with. It has been earned through the accumulation and organization of evidence, which is what we talked about before. And our work as a researcher adds to these conversations and strengthens or weakens a theory. So yes, in that sense, theoretical framework is a lens, but it is more than a signal for intellectual engagement. It tells us which community of scholars you are in conversation with and how your contribution either supports, challenges, extends, or complicates what has already been said. And this is why people find it difficult to define the theoretical and methodological framework, because I think it's not something that you choose as random. And that's really what happens. People say, what is your theoretical framework, or what's your methodological framework? And students kind of think, okay, I've got to make a choice. The process requires self-reflection and, most importantly, a recognition of the community and the conversation that you're going to be a part of. And the good news is that if you do proper literature review, that should already help you answer these questions. Because when you read widely enough, you start to recognize which conversations feel like your type of conversations, and that's where you find your community. There's a well-known diagram used to represent a PhD. I've just remade it, but I'm sure there's versions of this that you've seen before, where there's this large circle that represents all of human knowledge. And then the smaller inner circles, starting from the middle, are sort of broad general information that you're taught either at the school level or at the undergraduate level or master's level. And but the new knowledge that you're trying to seek under a PhD or any kind of research lies beyond where the edge of that circle is. And it's your job to avoid the full expanse of human knowledge, but understand enough about that specific area to get to that unique data point beyond the circle. And in the process, you will expand the circle of human knowledge, as you can see with the little dotted line, ever so slightly to include that dot within it. It's a big ask, but the thing to notice here is that without the circle, the dot has no location. So no data point makes sense unless it's in relationship to that circle. So once you understand which part of the circle your dot sits on, everything else sort of becomes clear. Before we sort of conclude, and we're coming to the end of my time, I think. Before we conclude, I want to share another sort of practical tip, and this time on writing. There are plenty of resources you can find, I'm sure, at your university or online on structuring and writing a paper, and they will give you a good list of what a paper should do. And there's no point in sort of me repeating that. But what I find in my experience is many people get lost in writing summaries and reports of what they've done or what they've experienced or observed, rather than providing a proper analysis. So the writing, it kind of, you would have seen that in a lot of comments, it's descriptive but not argumentative. And I don't think it's because the writer lacks analytical thought, but somewhere in the process of writing up, their own voice gets crowded out by this sort of accumulated weight of everything that they've read. It's a very common thing to see in undergraduate essays where somebody just read a few articles and they really want to demonstrate that I've read this. So it's heavy with quotations and things, but you don't really find the student's voice in there. So I use this trick. It's a useful trick. I use it with my PhD students, where I ask them to focus at the level of the paragraph, not at the level of the overall writing, but just at the paragraph. And I say, try to get the paragraph to do 4 things, 4 moves. Yeah. First is to establish the consensus. So whatever the paragraph is about, we establish the consensus, find the thing that most people in your literature agree on, state it clearly, and it's your interpretation, of course, of how you understand it, and then reference it properly across several sources. We're not putting quotes here. This is the general consensus in the literature. The second move is to go to the detail, which is to start to differentiate, because of course nobody says exactly the same thing. They might be in agreement, but they're not saying the same thing. And some researchers might emphasize one aspect and others might emphasize another aspect. And this is where the specific examples come in. People use quotes and findings and show that texture within the consensus. And it's important because it tells us, what the lay of the land is. Then comes a third move, which is to identify and engage with the deviation. So what's the place where someone disagrees, or where a finding in one context fails to hold in another context? So this is where you are trying to see the literature as a whole rather than just quoting or referencing individual pieces of literature. And this is where the gaps and opportunities lie as well. So this is really what the importance is. Once you've done this, the final move is, of course, much easier. You provide your explanation for why you think that deviation occurs. And you can also talk about why you think the consensus occurs, but it's a way for you to give your analytical voice, which transforms your writing into an argument. And one last thing I'll just sort of say that's out, please write as you go along. Those sort of well-structured paragraphs I'm talking about are very useful when you're compiling a longer paper at the end, and it helps when you're sort of struggling to put the right words on paper. You can fix bad writing, you can't fix a blank page, so it's better to have this stuff in hand. All right, I want to end. This is possibly my last sort of slide relating to the process. I want to end by showing you this diagram, and this is also from the Grote and Wang book that we talked about. But I didn't want to start with it because it looks super complex, but now that we've talked about it, hopefully it will provide a great overall summary of the research project and all the things that we've talked about today. It'll be a good way for you to remember it. So here you'll see the researcher, that is the I in the middle, is looking both ways. It's looking backwards towards the data and looking forwards towards the research output. We started our conversation with the data or information, what that is, and then looked at the existing body of literature to make sense of where that data or our observation sits. There's also, it reminds us that there's also another literature which gives us insight into theories and methods, and those are kind of overlapped but defined differently, which provides us this lens, this magnifying glass provides us this lens which is based on the facts and ideas that we gather from the literature. And through this information, we create two particular lenses, one of the theoretical framework and the other one of the methods, to now look at the data in a fresh, methodical way to make sense of it. And then once we've done that, on the other side, we make sure that we share our findings through academic writing, and thereby contributing to new knowledge. And as you can see on the top, the literature circle, it sort of now expands, to accommodate the new knowledge. So this diagram, I think, is a very useful, quick reference to the kind of things that I've found, sort of talked about, and hopefully I've sort of broken it down a little bit for you to understand those challenging components of how you can go about this. So I think we started with these sort of large, ambiguous, sort of technical kind of terms, which I think you find in a lot of situations, but I hope I've given you some ways to deal with that with your research journey. And I'm sure you already have some interesting questions you want to chase, and for those of you who teach, and I'm happy to sort of talk about that as well differently. There is often valuable research material in your classroom that goes unrecognized, so it's worth having that question. So thanks for joining me today. My research center, CAMEA, does research in history and theory of architecture in South Asia. So if you are working in that kind of area, feel free to reach out to me. And we also have this charitable society called Patio, which is based in India and helps early career researchers in building that community and develop research skill. So if there's any way I can help you in that research journey, please feel free to contact me via email or through social media, which is pretty effective these days. I'd be happy to help. And then, like I said in the beginning, you already know how to do this. Today, we're just about giving a process the name, and best of luck. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor Amit. That was really like a good, short, crisp way to wrap up the basics of research. And also, I think the diagram which you showed towards the end was really helpful. That brings a lot of clarity into the topics also, like the entire topic, in fact, that gives the clear, the roadmap as we were calling it. So thank you so much. We'll be taking the questions post the next session. So so as we move from what and how of research, our focus is now on the academic publishing and impact. We often find ourselves grappling with how to identify reputable publishers or what truly constitutes a high quality paper. Furthermore, metrics like the H index and site scores can feel like a maze if you don't understand their importance. To guide us through these professional nuances, we have with us Professor Shilpa Sharma and Professor Ketki Gupte. I request Professor Shweta from Acharya's NRV School of Architecture to introduce the experts.
Thank you, Ramya. Thank you to Professor Srivastava. Thank you so much for that insightful session. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers for today. Dr. Shilpa Sharma. She's the HOD at Rachna Sansat's Academy of Architecture. With over 25 years in practice and 15 years in teaching, she holds a doctorate from RTM Nagpur University. Dr. Sharma has been a pillar in promoting research-driven education, guiding both UG and PG scholars. Her own published work spans temple architecture and urban insertions, and she brings invaluable experience as a reviewer and member of the Journal of the IIA's editorial committee. A recipient of the IIA Award for Excellence in Research, she is also an avid potter who believes in a humanitarian approach to a professional training. Architect Ketaki Gupta is an associate professor at Rachna Sansat Academy of Architecture, Mumbai. With 2 decades of experience across education and professional practice, she holds a master's in environmental architecture. Her research expertise lies in climate responsive design and energy optimization, critical areas in today's built environment. Beyond her academic contributions at national and international conference, she has a robust professional background in healthcare design. She's a passionate mentor who encourages students to ground their design in evidence-based responsible architecture. We look forward to learning from their insights and experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. May I commence?
Yes.
Yes, you can start with your
I'll
presentation.
just share my PPT. Okay, so we are going to talk about the actual writing of the research over here, but I'm going to take a moment to remember my PhD guy, Professor Shirish Deshpande, who passed away just yesterday. I'm sure many of the teachers in the Indian community know him. I dedicate today's lecture to him with great fondness. Okay, so Dr. Amit Srivastava took us through the journey of research. At this point, I'm going to assume that your research is complete. It has been an intense private journey. You've, of course, looked at everything that you had to do throughout that process. Your journey is complete. It was now you have to put it forward in the public forum. So its reception depends upon the target audience that you have. So you have to get it ready for preparation in various ways. You may have, theses or design applications or lectures or book chapters and etc. One of the main important ways of putting across your research, apart from your thesis, of course, is writing a paper. Writing a paper is demonstrating the way you've done your research. It's displaying, your writing is to display
Professor Shilpa.
to concluding it or write it. And of course, it is important to you as teachers. I'm presuming a lot of people over here are teachers. It is the most formal and widely cited of outputs that you can put up. Of course, you are all aware of the requirements of Indian academia, of NAC, of NBA, etc. So not going into that right now. So about writing a paper, what are the components of actually putting forward your research? Dr. Amit Srivastava has put up a lot of this. So of course, naturally, my talk will overlap quite a bit there. So writing a paper, I'm going to deal with the anatomy of what a paper is, the different parts of it. The journal submission part, partly by me, partly by my colleague, architect Ketki Gupte. What constitutes a review process? What do reviewers look for? And what does a revision process constitute? And finally, Ketki will also be looking at the journal selection and indexing, which go towards your targeting impact. Of course, the very, very main component of an academic paper, when you have found that gap at the start, which of course then constitutes to make it original. Therefore, it means that when you come to writing your research, we have to make sure that it is not in any way plagiarized. Your data is not plagiarized or copied. It is, of course, now in today's world, not AI generated. There are online test software which help to determine this. And of course, it has to be unpublished either online or offline. So the process of making sure that what you have written is, sorry, what did I do? Is worthy of being published, goes through the plagiarism check and peer review.
Professor Shilpa.
At all times, it is. I'll go
Professor
to it
Shilpa,
now.
I think we are
Sorry?
losing. I think there's some network issue in between.
Okay, are you able to see my PPT?
Now, yeah, we can. Yes.
All right, sorry. Okay. It went off in the middle. Yeah. Okay. So I will go to the JI instructions in a little while. These sort of instructions are. Can you see this PDF that's here?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So I think this is the Journal of IIA. So there is a category in which all the instructions are given in detail. This or each journal for that matter has its own instructions to give you. They are largely similar because they try to keep your work anonymous. The reason for that I'll come to later. Length of the paper is given to you. The language, if you're writing for an English journal, of course, you would probably be asked to adhere to either British or American English, or as per any Indian language that takes place in the journal that you talk of. You will, of course, define the environment that you're talking about. If any, there are specific jargon of abbreviations and acronyms that you have. Words in any other Indian language may be used. You may use, of course, the original script, but it is always better to add in, the word as if it was written in English. You may or may not have to put up the pronunciation, but please put forward the meaning of it, because people from a different culture, it's difficult to understand when you're writing in, maybe the Indian context. Oops. Your style has to be clear and concise. Please do not repeat what you're saying. Please do not use adjectives. We as Indians are very fond of using adjectives in our native tongue, and we try to translate that when we write in English, which in an academic paper is not really relevant. As architects, somewhere we use a lot of capitalization. Even if I'm using the word architect or engineer in a sentence, in the middle of a sentence, we will still write it with a capital letter, which is actually not right. Grammar, language, all this, of course, becomes not negotiable. As per the format of your template, bold lettering may not be permitted anywhere else except for titles and subtitles. The content structure will be given by the template. Again, it will follow this structure generally for any paper that you write for any journal in the world. You'll have an introduction, which includes a background and aim. It will include your research questions and objectives. There will be a review of literature to explain what it is that other people have spoken about a similar topic. There will be the methodology that you have chosen for your research. There will be results and findings that which will come out of your methodology applied on your data. There will be a discussion that you have, a sort of conversation about trying to explain what is what. And then at the end, you will conclude with whatever recommendations you have to say or bring about your own conclusions. There's a sample paper that I will just go through quickly, where you will see that this follows the same thing that I have just spoken about. There's an introduction. You will see that there is what the study is out to do. It's explaining VADA. It's explaining the term where it has come from. It talks about the methodology. It talks about the entire discussion or description of the data. It will finally go to the inferences that you have derived through your research. And finally, it will have the conclusions and, of course, a list of references at the end. At the start, there will be the title, like we saw, which reflects the aim or the research question. It in a single sentence gives you what your research is all about, which is followed by the abstract. I'll do these in a little more detail a little later. I will go through the abstract also later, which goes through the same chronological sequence as the paper. And at the end, of course, there's a list of references. Either they're textual like AP or MLA, or IEEE and Vancouver for numerical. Now, the format of a paper, like I said, it will be available on the website of the journal. This is where it is found in the IIA website. So you can use that PDF straight away. Now, coming to the format, the title of the paper, usually a maximum of 25 words, which includes a title and a subtitle. Now, what is a title and a subtitle? If you see these examples down here, you'll see that the blue part in each of them are the broader idea of what you're putting forward, like it's a traditional approach towards contemporary design or relations in architectural space. And then the brown part, which is a subtitle, is separated by a colon between the two. The brown part, which is the part that goes a little more into the detail of what you are doing with your research. Please be careful that this title is usually not written in sentence case. It is written in title case, which means that the first letter of each word should be capitalized unless it's an article, which is and the. And the prepositions are also not capitalized. So this becomes a way of putting forward the title correctly. The abstract is the same chronology of information as the main paper. So if you have the aim and the background first, and then the aim, and then the methodology and the results, somebody who's looking at the abstract will find that it will go through it and find out whether it is to be, the further paper is to be read or not read. Sometimes when it's paid research, it's a matter of putting up money. This also helps you inform the reader whether your paper should be bought or not. Please use sentence case inside the while writing the abstract. The range is usually given anywhere between 150 to 200 or 250 words. It is written in a single paragraph. I'm saying usually because, like I said, the template is supreme. It is written in a single paragraph without any divisions. It's usually written in a different font type. It may be italic than the main text. Again, no unnecessary capitalization. Very importantly, no bold letters. There are no images or citations that are used in an abstract, because it is like we have said earlier, it's a summary of what your paper says. Keywords come below the abstract. They will be either maybe in lowercase, or you might be asked to write each word with a capital letter separated by commas. You usually ask for 5 or 8 words. The purpose of this nowadays is usually for the ease of online search. So if the keywords match the keywords in your paper, then your paper gets thrown up along with the others that match with the keywords. Now let's look at the first part of, now we come to the main part of the paper, the introduction, where you're introducing the problem with its background. Why have you taken up this topic? What is the larger impact or the importance of your topic? And then this also talks about the gap, show the gap that the background puts forward. And this also has to talk about the aims and objectives of your particular research question, which is put up at the aim. Hypothesis may or may not be present. Objectives are to put it simply, shorter steps that you would take in order to achieve the answer to your research question. Please connect your aim, hypothesis, and objectives very logically, because that is what gives, again, logical sanctity to the methodology that you choose. Of course, here you please also state the scope and limitations of the study, what it is that you are going to do and what it is that you're not going to do. That will also depend on your methodology. Maybe you're talking about your subject in a quantitative or objective way, or you're talking about it in a subjective or quantitative way. In that case, please exclude what you're not going to do and make sure you put forward very clearly what you are going to do, because it should not look, your paper at the end should not look like you've left out the objectives you've created for yourself. The next part would be the literature review. It is the pink part of the Venn diagram shown in the earlier presentation. What is it that others have said about similar topics? Don't give a detailed account of this historical data. This part is not a summary of what you have read, but only a summary of the relevant points which are important for your study. The paper or the book that you have read may deal with XYZ, but you might have only the Y part of it that's relevant for you. So talk about it in your paper, talk about it, why it is important, talk about maybe the methodology is suitable for you, talk about the gap that you find in all the literature that you have read. This section, please remember, will have the maximum citations. I will come to the plagiarism check percentage a little later. The methodology, I don't want to repeat what has already been done. It's basically how your study was conducted. What is it that makes your selected methodology the most suitable for your kind of study? Describe the method so the reader understands its appropriateness and the validity of outcome. And also, if somebody else wants to do a similar study or use a similar methodology, they will understand why this particular methodology was useful for you and therefore will be for them too. So it's important to understand the setting, which is the context of the study. What is the sample data you select? What is the criteria of selection of whether it is, samples in terms of people, or in terms of buildings, or case studies in other cases? What are the methods that you use? The documentation of your data, and how is it that you are going to analyze it? Your subsection, you may or may not have subsections for this particular section, but that depends on what you want to include, exclude, or any specifics that you may have taken up. So in short, the methodology is the why, how, what is the analysis process you're going to take up, and at the end, you have to prove that it has been successful. The next part are the results of the findings, where you summarize what you have collected in your data. You do not put all your data into the paper. If you've gone through 100 samples that you have done and you've put in your recordings in a table, etc., you don't have to put that big huge thing over here. Just put in the summary of the collected data and the analysis that is performed on it. So sometimes it may be a statistical table, sometimes it may be a narrative where you're talking about what it is that you want to say, but describe it adequately in detail so that there is a logical, sequential connection between what you've set out to do and what you have finally done. Your method of analysis will, of course, be very important. The methodology and the method of analysis that you choose will be a part of your research design, which you may talk about when you're talking of your methodology too. It would be only fair to say that you need to mention all the data and not only pick out only the one that, proves your aim is correct. Because in research is not judgmental. It is fair to everything that you have found out. It is objective. Therefore, putting up contradictory ones might also throw up some interesting conclusions. Do not repeat your data continuously when you're doing tables or illustrations. Emphasize the most important ones first. Some journals have this section discussion as a separate one, but you may at times combine results and discussions together, where you will evaluate what you have done. You will emphasize whether what you have set out to do has been done. It will talk about a clear statement of linking the aim and hypothesis with the conclusions. It will put forward the importance of your findings. It will also corroborate what you have done or whether it contradicts the earlier literature that you have stated. And very importantly, whether you have addressed the gap that you have found at the start of your research. The conclusions and recommendations talk about the practical outcome of your study. It will try to explain any real life phenomena that you have set out to examine. It may also find that some problems remain unresolved at the end. So please be honest enough to speak about that, because you never know, there might be another researcher who reads your paper, finds a little statement at the end of it and may take it up further to your research. There may be further areas that you yourself find cannot address at that point, and you keep it open for other people to take up from your study. So what is the difference between research and conclusion? In the introduction, where you've given the background, it is the larger part of what you have stated. And then you have your research question that comes out of it. So the result that you look from your data, it directly addresses the research question, and the conclusion addresses the larger background that you have set up to put up. Citations and references are very important, because they are very important. It's very important to give credit to the people whose shoulders you stand upon. So this is the data, author, book, etc. that usually is covered under citations and references. It enables the reader to look for further sources of reading. It verifies whatever data you've put up. You're giving credit to the people who have helped you. And it also supports your arguments. So there are two types. There is APA, MLA, etc., which uses text. For example, you will see these names in bracket followed by the date. These are the citations which appear within the text itself. And whether they're book chapters or journals or website, they have different ways of citing them. So all the data that you need, author, the date of writing, the publisher, where it's published, comes as the list of references. The textual ones are IEEE, Vancouver, etc., where if you see the text on the right-hand side, the yellow ones are the numbers. So if number 10, whoever that author is, comes many times in your text, then you will repeat the number 10 as that many times. You will see that on the left-hand side, whether it's a journal or book or website, the data that is covered is the same that you had in APA and MLA, because the objective is the same. Illustrations and photographs, titling, captions are at the bottom. Please make sure figure 1, figure 2, etc. are quoted in the text. The illustrations or photographs cannot stand independently. You have to say as seen in figure 2 and then go on to explain what you want to say, etc. Tables are always titled above the text. If it is yours, please say author. If it is not yours, please give credit where it is due. Sometimes you may take a map of India, which is from an official website, and then you may put up your own data on it, in which case please cite the source from where you get the map, and then you can say adapted by author to show so and so. Now coming to the review is nothing but an assessment of the quality and validity of your paper and the validity of your research. It becomes a critical evaluation of the content, the methodology, and conclusion. In short, the sequential logic of your research is what will be checked at a peer review. So the purpose of the review is also to ensure suitability of the theme. So even if you have a brilliant research, but you are not able to put it forward in the correct language, grammar, style of the journal, you may be again asked to revise your paper as per the academic rigor of the journal. So the peer reviews, one is an open review where the identities on authors are known to each other, and the others is a blind review where the identities of authors and reviewers are concealed. These again will be of two types. Single blind, where the reviewer knows the author, but again the author would not know the reviewer. And double blind is where neither knows the other. Finally, it is the double blind review kind of journal that you should select, because then you know that the review has taken place in utmost objectiveness. There's a reviewer's report that I will just quickly show you. This is what is used. A similar one is used by several, journals. So you'll see that the reviewer's name is blocked out. There is no author's name here. There may be a code given, as you can see. I hope you can see the PDF on the screen.
Yes, we
Can
can see
yeah.
it.
So there will be a paper code, because every time that they refer to, there's maybe back and forth emailing during revision, review, etc. So a code, a number becomes something that is easy to refer to. So there will be a review of the paper where it'll look for contribution of language, organization, methodology, and so on and so forth, which we've already said, talked about, whether the structure is correct, whether your style and language is correct, whether your abstract is adequate, whether there are connections of theory, the theoretical framework is in place, the literature review is adequately, supports your arguments, puts forward the gap that you're looking for, methodology, interpretation of data, significance of your paper, plagiarism check. Different journals or conferences may have different percentages that they ask for. 10 seems to be a number that is quite, used a lot. If it is higher than 10, you may be asked to revise too, even if it's a well-written paper. Some of the journals might say 15 or 20. Again, this will be plagiarism check is usually done by the journal itself, so to maintain uniformity. Whatever the strengths and weaknesses, and if there are any suggestions given to you for revision, they will either accept your paper for publication as it is, or you will be asked to revise, or finally, if it doesn't match anything that the journal wants to put up, then it will be declined for publication. But decline for publication does not necessarily mean that your paper is not correctly written or that your research is not correct. It may just not suit the journal. It's like me sending a paper on history to a journal of environment. Obviously, they're going to decline it. Therefore, it becomes very important to choose the journal that you are putting up. There will be also later on, after the review process is over, there will be comments from the editorial team to ask you to look at various editing parts like footnotes, references, language, etc. Coming back to my PPT. So I will stop now and I'm going to hand over to Ketki, who will do this part of it. So I'm going to stop sharing now, please.
Yes.
Yeah, we can take questions later on. Ketki, if you can just join in.
Thank you, ma'am. Just sharing my screen, just a moment. Is the screen visible, Ramya?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Shilpa. It was a wonderful presentation. And we have had wonderful session before this where Dr. Amit showed us about how to go ahead with research, and Dr. Shilpa went ahead with how to write your research paper. So now I hope most of you will be ready to write your research papers here. The next question that comes here is, how do you make your paper visible? How do you increase its influence? So what we are talking right now, it is about the strategic publishing of your research paper. So what all you need to look at is decoding the metrics of publishing, choosing the right journals, and maximizing your research reach. So it's not only about how you write your paper, but how can I make my paper visible to maximum people? So difference is not in the quality, it is the strategy. So what you need to look at is why you want to publish, your intentions. You want to do it as a part of your PhD. You want to do it as part of your, because you are doing a particular kind of research. You want to do it as part of your institutional requirements. Where do you want to publish? Your first why will definitely be leading you to where you want to publish this paper. And the last but not the least is who reads your paper, which is equally important. So it is not only your impact of your paper is not dependent upon the efforts that you have put in the research and writing the paper, but it is also about the strategy that you take into publishing the paper. So we need to understand few metrics that go into it. These metrics are not the measures of your quality or the measures of your research of your paper. They are the measures of visibility and circulation of the paper that will be published. So the first thing that we need to understand is the H index. This index in particular is the author's impact. It measures the productivity and citation impact of the author. So for example, you have you are said to have an H index of 10. If 10 of your papers have at least 10 citations each. Okay. So if you publish randomly, what this means is you need to have consistent publications with consistent citations for it. If you just publish randomly, the curve for your H index will flatten. You need to publish strategically in properly indexed journals, which will have larger visibility. So this is a diagram where you can see the academic years in academic career on your x-axis, and the y-axis represents the H index. This diagram graph basically shows that H impact is not a defined figure. Okay? It depends upon the number of publications you have and the number of citations that they have received. So the comparison will be very different for a person who is just starting their academic journey, maybe in the early stage of his or her career. For them, the H index of maybe 0 to 5 is considered good. But for someone who is very influential, maybe has published numerous papers, for them, we can look at a criteria of 40 to 100, maybe even 100 plus. Since this depends upon the number of papers that you have published, the H index does not have a higher order limit. It can go beyond 100 also. So next thing is the journal metric. First thing, the H index measured how impactful a particular author is. Now, the next matrix that we are looking at looks at how effective or impactful that particular journal will be. So how visible your paper will be when you publish in that particular journal. So the first one is the site score, which is adapted by Scopus. What it measures is the average citation per document published in that particular journal in a window period of 4 years. So it is the average of all 4 years publications and the citations that they have received. So what does it give us? It indicates the visibility of that journal. So this will help you to select which journal you would want to publish in, which journals has a larger visibility, and which will have a larger access for which publishing in which journal will give larger access to your people. Okay. So this is used when you're specifically looking for Scopus index journals. Again, the site score over here will depend upon the number of citations that are received. So there's going to be no upper limit to the citation score or the site score as it is said. It shows, the graph over here shows how the site score defines a journal. So initial phase, when a journal is it's an emerging journal, it might have a lower site score of say 0 to 1. The journals, as they mature, the higher impact journals might have a site score of maybe 6 to 10 or 10 to 20 also. Again, one of the important factors that you need to look over here is this also will depend upon the good or bad, or the impact of that journal will also depend upon the discipline that you are publishing in. For example, if you look in the medical field, these papers have been published for years together. So the number of papers, the number of citations received in that particular field will be way beyond what we might receive in some of our architectural journals. So for us, maybe as architects, having a site score of maybe 6 to 10 or even 10 to 20 is very good. Whereas if you go for some of these medical journals, they might have a site score of around 20 to 50 or maybe even beyond 100. So deciding what site score is good also has to look into what kind of discipline we are trying to publish into. The next but similar metrics is the impact factor. This basically is a similar variation of your site score. It is defined by Web of Science. It also looks at similar average citations per document, but here the window period that they consider is for the previous 2 years window. So Web of Science is a little more selective journal, and it is often linked with institutional recognition. So impact factor is normally used when you're looking to publish in Web of Science index journals, or you're looking at targeting in your institution criteria defines that you need to publish in this kind of, you need to have a particular impact factor when you're publishing it. So similar graph for impact factor, like your site score, even the impact factor will not have a upper limit because it will depend upon the number of papers that have been published by that particular journal. This is then how do we consider which journal is good for our publication? Because a site score of 6 for an journal that is publishing about maybe environment or architecture might be a good option. But if you're looking at something that is dealing with medical research or research on cancer, which is going on a very large scale, a site score of 6 or an impact factor of 6 to 10 is very low. So then it becomes very difficult to judge a journal based just on your site score or impact factor. So this is where the journal quartiles comes into play. So this measures your relative ranking of a journal within a subject category. So now here comes a comparative ranking which deals with that particular discipline. So the quartile depends on the performance of all the papers that are published in that particular category. So it will compare the quality of journal within its particular discipline. So this is very important for targeting relevant academic visibility. It also will be important maybe for your, it might impact your API scores. So to put it in a nutshell, when you look at the quartiles, journal quartiles, whichever discipline you're looking at, the top 25% of journals will be coming under quartile 1, that is Q1, the next would be Q2, Q3 would be the next, and Q4 will be the bottommost. So the journals that are having the lowest impact factor or the lowest site score will be among the Q4, and the ones that are having maximum site score or impact factor will be in your Q1. So now it is very important to strategically select a your journal. The first come, like Dr. Shilpa had said, is your scope alignment. Are you planning to publish a paper on design research? Or is it a paper on urban studies? Is it a paper on sustainability? Or it could be numerous other topics that you are dealing with. You have to understand each journal will have its own scope of papers that it's going to publish. So even if your paper is very good, if it does not align with the scope of that particular journal, it will get rejected. So make sure before you give your manuscript to any journal for review, your scope aligns with the scope of that particular journal. So don't just chase the highest impact factor. You also need to look at the right audience who will be looking at your paper, to whom this paper will be accessible. Okay. So to help with all these things, there are global indexing ecosystems. So an indexing is not just a listing of journal, it is a validation, it is the visibility, as well as it helps with the discoverability of your paper. So first, as we all are aware, I would like to take up Scopus. It is one of the major repository or database which has abstracts, research papers, and citations. This is managed by Elsevier. What it gives is the site score of the journals that you're publishing it. It helps with the citation tracking. It gives the author profiles of the authors who have published in that journal. Also, the full research paper is available for download on paid subscriptions. Some of those papers are also available without subscription, so that depends upon the kind of journal that is published in. The next, similar to Scopus, is your Web of Science. It is a little selective database. It is managed by Clarivate. What it gives is your impact factor through your journal citation reports. It has a very strong citation analytics. And like Scopus, it also has full research papers for download. Some of them based on subscription, some of them are open access. Now, this particular listing or this particular indexing is the directory of open access journals. What it does is it will index all the open access journals. Open access journals are basically the journals which do not require any subscriptions and are freely available to any user who wants to access it. So it is basically like you have all the journals accessible to you. However, since it is a directory, it will definitely have a quality filter based on which the journals can be put up in DOAJ. So it ensures ethical publishing. At the same time, it promotes free access to knowledge. The most popular one, which we all tend to look at when we first start our research, is the Google Scholar. Google Scholar, understand everyone, is a search engine. It's not an indexing database. It is very good for visibility, but it will not ensure any quality. Google Scholar will definitely give you the citation counts. It will also give you the H index at author level. It will include not only your research papers, but it also has thesis, it has reports, it could be conference proceedings. It will have all type of publications that are available on the net. So it gives you a wider access to everything. You can have a good review or understanding of what all research is done, but it will definitely not screen any of the research, any of the papers. So this particular Google Scholar will not ensure quality. So understand the purpose and the working of each of this. This is what will help you to decide where and how you need to publish. Last but not the least is something which you have to be very careful. It's a red flag warning. Like in everywhere we go, there might be fake indexing claims. Understand the most common thing some of the journals do is index in Google Scholar. Understand, Google Scholar does not index papers. It is just a collection. It is a search engine which will give out results based on the keywords that you put in. So index in Google Scholar is not a valid claim. Also understand, any publication will have to go through its review process, like was explained by Dr. Shilpa. So it is a tedious process. It is not possible to get your papers published in a very short time. So any journals that are promising unrealistically fast publications is somewhere you need to look at if it is a red flag. You also need to understand if there is no clarity about how the peer review is going to happen, because that is one of the most crucial steps which will be ensuring the quality of a research paper in a journal. So the peer review is very crucial, very critical. So whenever you are publishing in a journal, make sure there is clarity about the process of peer review. Also, the most common thing that comes across nowadays is demanding high publication fees, which I think is unethical and should be looked out with caution. So now we are done with different metrics. We are done with how different indexing systems work. Now, just let's look at why do you need to publish the papers? Okay, so first, one of the most prominent thing that happens is it is desirable that your PhD research work for PhD scholars is published in a peer-reviewed or a refereed journal, and it has to be presented at various conferences and seminars. So the quality of assessment of PhD degrees is dependent upon the institutions. So they may set up their own guidelines as to what and how the publication needs to be done. The Gazette dated 7th November in 2022, however, does not mention any specific requirement of a publication. That depends upon the institute in which you are doing your PhD henceforward. The UGC has put up a notice on 16th of July 2025, which stated that they have discontinued the UGC care list. So there will be no listing of UGC journals, UGC care journals. Rather, they have developed a suggestive parameters how you can choose the peer-reviewed journal. I'll just share the content with it. So these are basically the criteria for selecting a journal, what is the title of the journal, the ISSN number, the periodicity, the continuity, the contact and publication details, transparent review policy, which is very important. It is hosted on a certified domain. You need to check if it has an open access or is it a subscription-based policy. Is it included with the national or international repositories? And what is their archival policy? Similarly, these are the suggestive parameters for how and what a editorial board should be. What should be the details of the editorial board? What should be the composition? What should be the review process? So all these parameters are suggested by the UGC. So in a nutshell, your journal should have an editorial board. It should have a review committee. It should be publishing regularly online or offline. It should be double-blind peer-reviewed and a code of ethics to be formally published by the journal. So understand everyone, publishing is not the end of your research. Rather, it is the beginning of the influence of your research. With that, I end my session over here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ketki. So, and thank you, Professor Shilpa and Professor Amit, for the insightful presentation. I think we have now, a package where we started with the process of research to, the structure of a paper, and then also like the nuances of publishing and finding quality publications where one can submit their research. So I think this is also a place where faculty, sort of find confusing or challenging rather. And then we have some clarity on it. Thank you. So let us now get into the Q&A part. So we have gathered a few questions through a Google form, and we also have few questions in the chat box as well. So we will take the question and answer session right now, and then we will move to the workshop bit of it. I will now request Sanjita to please take over.
Thank you, Ramya. So building on those insights from the presentations, so we can begin with Dr. Amit with your questions, the questions in the chat that have been addressed to you. Professor Manju asks, what is one question about the built environment or about architectural practice, education, or history that you find yourself returning to repeatedly but have never quite resolved?
Yeah, well, that is a question we posed actually for the workshop. So interesting that it's being thrown back at me. But I think it's interesting because I often sort of speak to a lot of people who sort of say, well, you do research in all these varied areas. How does that make sense to you? And the reality is that, yes, all of my things, all the research that I do, even though they are completely different case studies about completely different contexts, they are all, at least in my head, bound by one single question that I've always been fascinated by, which is how do we relate with the material world? So that the question of material choice in architecture is it's my continuous question that has never really quite been answered, and yet I have so many answers for it. But how do we relate with materials? And I wanted to get past that idea that it's always an economic or a sort of technical choice that we make. And so just by asking the question of why we use materials, there's the whole social life of materials, how materials are constructed, so construction techniques. So I do a lot of work in construction history. Then there's a whole lot of things around processes of labor and processes of material production and the economies of that and the political economies behind it. And now a lot of work that I'm doing is looking at the Indian Ocean Rim and the sort of South-South collaboration under things like the non-aligned movement, which allowed the trade of materials and things to happen. So again, if you've got one unanswered question, that is a fundamentally good place to start, which will lead you to a whole world of research. I haven't answered the question, and I don't think I'll ever will, but that's probably the best thing about that sort of approach, is that it allows me to answer so many sub-questions on the way. So I'll leave it at that. Of course, I can talk about that endlessly. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have the next question from Professor Shri Sitaram Lakshmi. How can we address the context if the research is more dynamic?
So research being more dynamic is a pretty broad thing, so I don't really know what you mean by research being dynamic, but I would assume what you mean is that the context is constantly changing, right? So let's keep that as what the dynamism is.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I ask that question directly to you, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The thing was, you mentioned context of context. So that slide, the thing is like when we are doing in a different context, when I mean to say when we are looking for global context and Indian context and we are doing some research, I'm doing research on pedagogy. So when we are trying to look into the issues that have been raised, how we can, because if the research is more dynamic, that means every day if the pedagogy is getting changed, and then we are looking a lot of research that is happening. So how we can address the research gap? So that is my question on context of context.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that's how I was interpreting it. I don't think it is true of just some areas of research. Almost all areas of research, there's always the risk that in the process, in the time it will take for you to do the research, other people would have, firstly, the context would have changed, and also other people would have done more research, which would change the literature landscape as well. So I think we all understand that, and there is some inherent limit to what we can do. So when we set up literature review or whatever, we set up limits, and okay, I'm only looking at publications from 2015 to 2025. So if something's published in 2026, I don't know what that is, and that is understandable. But like you talked about pedagogy, I think there's two areas that I work on. One is an area of collaboration in architectural pedagogy, which sort of changes not only globally but every day. And the other area is use of AI in pedagogy. You've got to know how quickly that landscape changes is crazy. But again, what it means is that with that sort of Venn diagram thing, we don't ask the super big questions that take months of background research. We ask the shorter questions, which can be produced really quickly, because you know that the context is changing so quickly that you want to put this stuff out there so that people can react to it. So I'll give you an example with the AI thing. We were looking at the use of AI in education pedagogy, and even when we started it, we divided the question into 3 smaller parts and started work on them simultaneously, with the idea that we will publish each one every year with an understanding of a longitudinal study, where every year we are comparing not only the new data, but also what we published the year before. And so it builds on top of that. And that's been a very successful publication as well, because the people are continuously responding to it. So I think, dynamism kind of speaks to that Venn diagram in a way that your circles become smaller and you ask more effective questions about things that are happening immediately, rather than trying to make a large grand claim about AI and 10 years of AI, which by the time you publish it will be obsolete. So that's all I can say at this stage, but I'm sure there are other things I can respond to later.
Thank you, Dr. Amit. Dr. Shilpa, we have a question that has come in for you from the form. As studio work begins to intersect more with research, navigating the publishing landscape can feel overwhelming. How do you identify journals for research to translate studio work into research?
I guess every time we decide what we want to do for our studio, we decide an objective. That objective usually is what is it that we expect the student to learn to assimilate at the end of that exercise. That usually could probably translate into the objective or the aim of the research, to find out what it is that you are trying to get the student to achieve by the end of the exercise. So it could possibly become your subject totally. As far as time goes, I don't know how to address this because, yeah, with the current system of NAC or requirements of PhD becoming, a regulation under NEP, it does seem like a necessary burden that the teachers have to carry. But I think once you're done with it's like, being undergrad design, you're spending those nights and days thinking and drafting your design. But at the end of it, you're happy with what you turned up. I think research is very much that. Research is not supposed to put you in a comfort zone. It's supposed to make you uncomfortable so that you reach the edge of the circle. And eventually, what you have put up, of course, I want to show the world what I have done. And therefore, it's a matter of putting it up to the target audience at the end of it. So leave the NACs and the NEPs aside. I think it's a matter of personal fulfillment that, you would want to take your mental discipline ahead with. Because I find that once you do your research, it may or may not be applicable to your teaching, but it definitely should be transforming your personality within. At least do it for the joy of that.
Yeah. Thank you. The next question as well is addressed to you, Dr. Shilpa. With the growing number of journals, both credible and predatory, selection becomes a critical decision. How to choose a suitable journal for my research?
I would say number one, don't pay anybody anything. The moment because what had happened is Ketki showed the UGC requirements. Earlier, there was a UGC care, the PhD made it mandatory for them to be published. So very often, and they had to be done in a certain kind of time frame. So that gave birth to a lot of these predatory journals who were, at least in India, would say, when I did my PhD back now, 3,000 rupees to publish a paper in 3 weeks, which was, I have to do it. So I'm going to pay 3,000 rupees. Of course, in other places, it may be in terms of dollars, or now it may have a zero added on. But with the UGC coming up with saying that this does not become mandatory in the way it says, very often universities have taken this up to put up a list of journals which they have screened to look at, the credibility of the journals, to make sure they are not that, paid kind of thing. Because very often, I'm not sure, at least the places that I have been to don't pay the reviewers, because reviewers are supposed to be at a place in their research where their expertise is needed, and it's not a paid expertise. Because if you're paying me to review, then anyone can say you are also paying me to influence my decision on the paper. Therefore, monetary exchange does not usually form part of a reviewer's process. Choosing the journal. So this becomes a predatory journal. This phenomena is in India. I don't know how it is outside the country. In fact, I have heard that there are a lot of agencies now which you can hire to write your paper out. I don't know how that happens, because I would refuse to give my research to anybody else to talk about it, because I know what I want to say. I can't expect not even AI to say it the same way that I want to talk about it. Choosing a journal topic-wise, content-wise, field-wise is a matter of research that you have to do. Like the example that I gave earlier, if I am talking of a historical topic, I have no business putting it up in maybe an environmental journal. It will be refused outright. So that becomes a more common sense decision than anything else.
Thank you, Dr. Shilpa. Professor Ketki, we can now move on to the questions that have been addressed to you in the chat. So Professor Sujata asks, once a paper is published in Scopus or the Web of Science, then what does indexing the paper mean? How can it be done, and how much time will it take in general?
Thank you. I think Sujata wrote this question, right?
Right. Yeah.
Hi, Sujata. The first thing is your paper or the research article is never indexed. It is the journal which is indexed. So the indexing of the journal is already there. Every journal that you're going to apply to if it is based, it is listed in a Scopus index, this thing, it means it is there in the list of journals that is approved by Scopus. Okay, so you do not index the journal, or you do not do the indexing after you submit your paper. The journals that you're looking at are already, you look at the journals that are already indexed in Scopus or Web of Science. Sujata?
She's probably not around. She's typed in the question, but you want to address the time period?
Yeah, we will take one more
I'm
question.
here, ma'am.
Yeah.
And then Sujata.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
Thank you for your response. Actually, we have published a paper in Scopus and one in WOS, but we were not, I mean, that is there. It is there in the website also. But what our college is asking us, whether it is being indexed, your paper is being indexed. I just want to know the difference between whether my paper is indexed, how to find that, what is that indexing my paper means.
Indexing your paper means the journal in which your paper is published is indexed in the list of Scopus index journals or Web of Science journals, or whichever indexing system that your institution is asking for. So you have to look at the name of the journal in the indexing list.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Since
Are
we're
they,
short
I'm sorry,
time,
one moment, please.
Yeah.
Are they asking for your personal score as an author in some way? You might be confusing that, Ketki.
Is it the H index that they are talking about?
No, ma'am. Not
It
the
is
H index.
indexing in the Scopus
Indexing a
index
paper.
journal,
Yes,
right?
Scopus index. Yes.
Okay, okay. So then you'll just have to look if your journal is indexed in Scopus.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Since we're short of time, we'll just be taking one last question from Professor Prachi. For research in architectural history, how challenging is it to get published in a Scopus indexed journal? And what factors most influence acceptance, especially in largely qualitative studies?
There's no difference. Why should it be a challenge just because it's qualitative? There's no the only way that it will get power, of course, it has to match whatever the journal theme is, and secondly, it is presenting your sequential logic in the clearest way possible, and of course, it has to address a gap. So once you have this, it doesn't matter whether it's qualitative or quantitative.
So
The quality of your research.
can I add one thing? I think this is a kind of question that I often sort of find where people are thinking about which journal should I publish in. And I think you should always publish in the journal out of which you are reading other people. If you find people who write about things you are interested in and use methodologies and approaches that you're interested in, find the journal that they're publishing in, and the best of that lot, publish in that, because that means the journal automatically likes that kind of qualitative or history kind of research that you are trying to do. So that's why I always sort of say, don't think about the journal, think about the community. It's a good way of thinking about it, because that is already a community of a journal is not just an outlet. You have to understand a journal is also a group of people who are reviewing it and whatever. So they have their own ecosystem of a community that supports and allows for the review to happen. So if you find the community, they're more likely to value your research. And so I think instead of looking for the journal, look for the people and look for the research that you want to speak to, and then choose the journals that they publish in. That would be my trick. But anyway, yeah.
There's just one question I want to address about time. Time could be anywhere between 2 weeks, 2 months to 2 years. But I think if you're looking at it for your PhD purpose or something like that, where it becomes a mandate for you to publish, and a note of acceptance from the journal usually also helps instead of having the actual published paper in hand.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Amit, Dr. Shilpa, and Professor Ketki for answering all of those questions. I hope this segment answered most of our questions. We have more questions in the form. we'll collate all of them together and send them across to you. I would request Ramya to take it up.
Yes. Yes. So with this, the lecture part of it is actually coming to an end, and I think Professor Shilpa and Professor Ketki, if
Yeah.
you had mentioned
Yeah.
that you
Thank you for
would like
having
to,
us.
yes, yes. So thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
joining
much.
us. Yes, thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you.
really insightful presentation that you had shared with us, and the questions were also answered very well. Thank you so much. And I think now we can move on to the last part of it, where we will be having a little workshop, which will be led by Professor Amit. So, Professor, would you like to take it up from here, or do you?
Yeah, I think. All right, I will just sort of mention originally I thought of the workshop as a bigger thing where we would kind of go back and forth, but I think we have limited time. So instead of sort of doing groups and having discussions like that, what I was hoping is that before you came, we asked you to kind of think about this unanswered question or a sort of discovery that you made. And one of the tools that I've kind of shared in today's presentation is the idea of the three Venn diagram, the three circle Venn diagram, where you've got the architectural issue, the extradisciplinary domain, and whatever specific method or the discovery that you're dealing with. So I'm just sort of thinking a good thing or valuable thing I think for people might be that we spend about 15 minutes of this half an hour where you try and do that diagram for your own kind of question. And then maybe in the last sort of 10-15 minutes, we can discuss a few of those and sort of see how it helps you develop that. So I'll just write that as a reminder of things in the chat as a question. So it just says, work with the unanswered research question. Try to build the three-circle Venn diagram. Circle one is the architectural issue. So how do you think it deals with what aspect of architecture it deals with? And then depending on whether you're looking at social issues or technical issues or whatever, what extradisciplinary domain you might identify it sort of using information from. And then if there's specific method or a kind of case study that you might be able to identify. And then, have a little think about how will you define that gap, because that's where that sort of question is at the intersection of the three and whether that makes sense at the intersection. So let's use sort of 15 odd minutes to kind of do a little exercise, and then we can have a discussion with a few people and see what use they found of that kind of tool. Does that sound okay?
Yes. So I think put a 15 minutes timer, and then we will see if whoever wants to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
That
So I
sounds
think we
good.
can start now, and the question is in the chat box. But if you have any doubts, you can either put it up in the chat box, or you can ask also.
Yeah, I'm here, so that is the whole point. That you can
Yes.
ask clarificatory things you can ask in the middle, but let's go through that exercise for about 15
Right.
minutes on your own before we sort of have a broader discussion. Yeah. I think if you guys have any questions or something, you can always put it in the chat. We've got potential opportunity for a longer Q&A if that's required, or just, I think you could put up your hands on Zoom as well if you need to talk. In fact, if you finish, it'll be good to put your hand up. That way I know a lot of people have finished and maybe we can start discussing earlier.
Yeah, hi. Can I share my screen to discuss? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Ritik, can you give her the option to share, please? It is Professor Sita, Sri Sitaram.
Sita.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I
in the
can share
meantime,
now.
yes, you can share it. Yes. In the meantime, Kunal, he's asked a question. Can this
Yeah.
be a research question?
Yeah, I can read that. So it
Right,
says
right, yeah.
impact of AI-driven systems on architectural design of a hospital using AI for system optimization in OPD patients. Yes, absolutely. That can be a question. I would sort of say it will require some further limitations on where the hospital might be located, because of course the architectural design will be limited by type of hospital and location of hospital and things like that. So you'll have to put a few more sort of limits on that to be something that you can complete within a reasonable frame of time. But I think, yes, it's definitely an area. In fact, it's an area of research that one of my PhD students is working in, particularly looking at optimization of operation theaters rather than OPD patients. And in that case, we are looking at robotic surgery and AI. In fact, there is a paper we recently read about optimization of OPD patient areas in, I think it was in Turkey or Lebanon, where the paper was dealing with very similar things. So that's a fantastic question. I think very appropriate for the time right now. It would, again, in your case, the two circles are quite obvious within architecture and the domain of the AI-driven systems. The third thing would be methodologically how you approach this and what skill sets you have in terms of dealing with AI or optimization tools for that matter. I hope that helps. We can discuss it a bit more if required. Sorry, Seda Lakshmi.
Yeah, Professor Sita, please.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. I think the host disabled the screen sharing.
Ritik, can you please give her the option of screen share?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not actually. It's not coming.
Do you want to send it to me? I can present it also.
Where I can keep it in the chat box.
Yeah, that's also fine.
Yeah.
So after Professor Sita's, I think we can take up Professor Manju's. She has also put something in the chat box. Yes.
So,
Are you able to share it, Professor?
I think image is not being shared. To share it in WhatsApp.
Do you want to share it with me on WhatsApp? I can download it and do screen share as well if you want.
Now I think I can share my screen. I'll just
Okay.
share. Yeah.
All right.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
So can you
But
see my
yeah,
slide? Yeah.
Yep.
As I said, Amit, like I'm doing research on pedagogy. So I try to, with your Venn
Professor,
diagram,
can you
the
just
kind of
sorry for
yeah,
cutting. Can you just click on the screen? I think we can see all your screens. So yeah, there.
it's fine. Yeah,
Now it's fine.
yeah. So as I said, like I'm doing on pedagogy,
Yeah.
with your with your Venn diagram, what you have showed, like with architectural discipline and methods and all. I was trying to put this thing where I'm trying to relate, like because it's a pedagogy, and then in architecture pedagogy, we are seeing a transition between art, science, and technology and design process, and now AI coming into picture. So the central part, which my question was, how to motivate students to think in the field of this process and methods and technological changes.
So
So
I would suggest that this is you have very broad things which don't quite intersect. So you've got to make a choice between, are you really interested in understanding the relationship between particular aspects of design process and
mhm.
art, science, technology? I would sort of say multidisciplinarity maybe, or do you mean by the fact that, are you talking about collaboration across art, science, and technology? So that aspect of architectural design and the process, that would be an overlap. So either you really question where that overlap is, or you go down a separate question, which is motivation, which is a different thing, and say, well, how does motivation enter into the studio? And then your second diagram was actually be about psychology, because we'll have to look at what motivation means psychologically, and then seeing how the domains of motivation as a psychological question intersect with the domains of architecture, where the idea of inspiration or motivation is kind of looking at. And then we say, all right, at the overlap of that and at the overlap of the studio, could there be a question? So I think there's competing things here. So of course they're broad, but they're also competing. I think you have to either decide whether motivation is your main thing, or the overlap between the interdisciplinarity and the design process is your main thing.
My idea was to motivate students to think. That is the central question that has been raised when I started my research as well.
Yeah.
How to motivate students to think.
So I think, yeah, if you want to find out about motivation, then you have to understand motivation within the domain of architecture, which is what I would say my first circle is. And I would say, well, what does motivation look like in architecture? So we could talk about things like, what does it mean to have inspiration, or what does it mean to be creative? And then that could be a way of defining it within the architectural realm. And then the extradisciplinary realm would be the best way to understand what motivation is. So of course, other people deal with it. So you can talk about sociologically what motivation is. But I would sort of say the simplest thing would be to look at the domain of psychology, for instance. So in psychology, how is motivation defined and managed and considered? And then we start looking at that overlap. So how does the domain of creative thinking and innovation within architecture compare to how psychologists talk about motivation, right? So then that gives you a very clear overlap between the two domains and a topic that you're looking at. So then what you will see is, I don't know if you can see my cursor, or maybe I can draw on it. And then what we're looking at is here in this area, you've got architectural sort of motivation and inspiration. And here you've got psychology. And then this area that you will have will be where you will look at the overlap between the psychological interpretations of motivation versus architectural interpretation of motivation. So now your screen is moving, so my
okay. This
edits
no, I
have
was
disappeared.
unable to see your thing actually.
You are unable to see it.
When
Okay.
you're presenting, that's the thing. Yeah, but we can. I mean, you
Doesn't
can.
matter. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the overlap of that. And then the third domain, you've also written AI in there. So then that could be a process or method. And then you would sort of say, are you talking about the way AI is used by you as a teacher, or how AI is used by the student themselves? So then again, you really need to kind of start defining those domains. I think right now they are too many competing things. So I think if motivation is your main aim, then let's try to understand what motivation means in those three different domains. That's already a pretty big question. So yeah.
Yeah. So as I said, it was totally a dynamic picture that I'm finding.
Absolutely, but that is also the thing that means you are looking at too many sort of competing things. So multidisciplinarity is a complete area of research in itself, and then the AI is a complete area of research, and so there are sub questions within all of that you'll have to bring it down to. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But how do you is it a PhD research that we can proceed further, like on this particular aspect?
Absolutely. I've got a PhD student right now who's looking at collaboration in the design studio, and it's a conversation I have with her all the time. What does multidisciplinarity mean in different contexts, and what does collaboration mean? So in architecture, collaboration means completely different things than what might be in another discipline. So we look at collaboration as a term and sort of try to understand what is collaboration in engineering, what is collaboration in firefighting, what is collaboration in other places, and how architecture can intersect with those domains of collaboration to understand how collaboration can be incorporated into the studio. So definitely, absolutely an area of research that can be done. In fact, many projects can come under this. So we'll have to define it in a much narrower way for it to be a PhD or a research outcome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So next, I think Professor Manju has shared her process with me. I'm sharing my screen. Professor Manju, you can unmute and I don't know if you can see it properly, but
I think it's still loading for me. Oh yeah, this is the because Professor Manju has also shared a sort of digital version.
This is not mine. This is somebody else.
Oh, sorry, this is Professor Manju. I'm sorry. This is
Professor Manju has also shared it in the digital version, so I can.
Okay,
Professor Harini, I'm sorry. So
okay, discuss Harini, then I will do next.
Yeah, sorry.
No
yes,
problem.
yes.
Okay, all right. So this one, oh, good Lord, I should be able to sort of read everything on there. So the architectural issue is indoor residential thermal comfort. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I talk, sir? Can I explain?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, please. Yes.
Yeah. I'm living in a hot and humid region.
Yes.
I'm concerned about the thermal comfort, indoor thermal comfort of the occupants, like during heat waves, particularly summer. And in this age of increased AC usage, more and more contributing to carbon emissions and raising global temperatures, accounting to global warming. I still find some homes, traditional homes in an urban area, which they have, which they are still sticking to traditional knowledge systems, like wetting the floors in the morning and even in the evening, and also their terraces during heat stress hours. Okay, so this reduces the humidity, indoor humidity levels, so that the concept of evaporative cooling keeps them thermally comfortable in the indoors. These are some passive strategies which are inbuilt in our lifestyle. So these sort of homes not only exist in this, I got little attracted, or maybe fascinated to say how a simple act of using water to wet the floors in the peak hour, like in the morning and in
Yes.
the
Yeah.
evening, like could actually reduce the indoor temperature. Like I am still observing on my way home and on my way to other places. Like I'm still observing some homes which have narrow entrances, not like a wide entrance, like an alley kind of entrance.
Yeah,
And
these are
that
all
also,
observations. I understand.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
And the
I'm trying
question,
to, the question is, I'm trying to bridge the gap, like what about the altered lifestyles in the urban area? What do they do to thermally balance themselves? Like passive strategies, do they really engage in passive strategies, or they still opt for the air conditioning as one quick solution? I'm trying to bridge the knowledge gap.
okay, all right. So the thing is, it's a fantastic area of research, and I totally understand that a lot of people get confused about what their research is about and what we call research significance and value, right? So, of course, if you do research in this area, as you're sort of saying in the background, it will have implications for, the use of technology, climate change, all of those sort of things. But your actual intervention or actual research is not, I'm guessing, is not about that. So you have to be clear about what you want to research. If your intention is to find out what the methods are, how do they do this, what is the passive methods that they use, then it's more of an anthropological research where you're looking at the relationship between the human beings, their routine and their environment, and you are capturing the data around how these things can happen and then explaining them in packages for other people who do not know about it. It's a very different kind of research than if you then start saying this has great impact for energy use, for instance, then that's a completely different research where you would compare the energy factors in a certain format of thermal management and then compare it with these passive systems and then demonstrate what the values are. So you've got to clarify whether you're interested in comparing the value gain, or are you interested in the anthropological processes of how these people do it and then inform us about that method. Can you see the difference between the two?
Yeah, I got it, sir.
Yeah.
Like maybe
So I think
in both aspects it can be researched, right? You can research in terms of comparison with the value gains and also in terms of anthropological research, behavioral and yeah,
absolutely. As a
yeah,
research project, however, what I would say is that you should always keep one thing primary, right? So if it's
yeah,
primarily an anthropological research with a little bit of a comparative research, then it's okay. And if it's primarily a comparative research with a little bit of anthropological component, then it's okay. Because if you
yeah.
keep them almost equal, then it'll get confused what your research is about. And then again, this is what I always sort of say, you will then confuse who your community is, right? Who are the people who are
Yeah,
going to read and review it? If you write it anthropologically, it will go to some people who do anthropological research, and they will really like the fact that you've gone into these places that is not accessible to others, and you have been able to methodically write about how they do things. But if you then also have some energy component and you've done anthropological work that goes to somebody who does comparative, computational, or energy research, they will be like, I don't understand this method. What the hell is this person talking about, right? So I think, yeah, it's very important to see who your community is, and that will define what the methodological but also theoretical scope of your research is. So I think it's an absolutely doable, fantastic project. You just need to figure out where your interests lie more. Are you more trying to map it in a sort of methodical way, or are you trying to create a comparative dimension of how much value there is in this process? Yeah.
Yeah, I got it, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't have track of who we are discussing next, so I will.
Sorry,
Yeah,
so I was saying that we will go with Professor Manju right now. And then I think Kunal, I think after that we might have to probably, close the session because of...
Okay, that's all right. So with Professor Manju, I think I've downloaded that, so I'll sort of share here with the hope that that is the correct file.
Yes.
My laptop's running out of battery. Just give me a second.
I was doing a research in the part of glazing areas in the hot and humid climate or any other climatic conditions and the kind of requirements for glazing we need for visual aesthetics, and also we have to protect that for other reasons and everything from glare and everything, and we have other acoustic installations and everything. So these kind of light levels, how it is affecting the the user, it is used in, they were working in the spaces because these are mostly used for external facade for aesthetic sense, and ultimately people who work inside, they need to protect themselves from the heat and as well as the sound and everything, and it goes into the field of psychologically how it traps the mind and everything.
I would sort of say it doesn't, right? And this is very important to understand. If you want to do psychology, then that's a particular way of looking at it, because a lot of this kind of research, because you see in the end you say productivity. Now productivity can be measured in different ways. So either you're saying how it changes the individual psychology and allows them to be more productive, or you're actually measuring the outcomes as a study of productivity. So these will be slightly different. I think you've got a whole lot of
measuring the outcome of the the usage of.
Yeah, so then that doesn't purely come into psychology in that sort of obvious sense. It'll come into the way we think about the business systems and sort of see how it is measured, what their productivity. So I think productivity is a different term than, and in the previous one we were talking about psychology as motivational, right? So when the lighting condition changes, are we talking about how it affects me as a person to be able to do the thing, or are we measuring my outcomes, whether they've been increased or not? And these are completely different things which are based on completely different disciplinary context. So I think, but I think the other thing is you've got a very specific methodology kind of, which is looking at biometric sensors, for instance, and then in other place. So here you've written high-rise and commercial, but on one side you've just sort of written on the right-hand side, you've talked about office productivity. So I think that would be quite interesting if you're talking about biometric sensors. So biometric sensors are not going to, they're measuring certain things, right? And then you've got to sort of say, well, if biometric sensors are measuring, let's say, my body temperature or heart rate or whatever else that you're doing. So firstly, you've got to figure out whether or not you'll be able to do that. But secondly, if you're doing that in an office environment, what exactly data are you getting, right? So either you will then have to make a connection between the biometric information and the psychological state of the person, which that'll be not enough. So then you will have to do subjective surveys looking at mood analysis and stuff to add the biometric sensor data to the mood analysis and sort of say, this biometric profile relates to this kind of mood outcome, because you will need subjective components if you're talking about psychological issues as well. It can't be purely biometric. So again, so it needs a little bit more definition there, I think, because I think there's a few overlapping components.
Yes, that's a few overlapping, as you said.
Yeah,
because,
and again, I would sort of say daylighting and acoustics is also complicating it matter quite a bit. So the kind of biometric data you will get for lighting will be different than acoustic components. My major concern is not that this is not a doable project. This is definitely a doable project. My major concern is there's a lot of people who are doing this, right? So in your case, the problem isn't that the circle is empty. I think the triangle is empty. I think the triangle is very crowded. So I think you'll have to really narrow this down and sort of, I would say, if you remove the daylighting and look at acoustic, but you look at a very specific type of office environment. So I'll give you an example. I did a similar kind of study on prisons, for instance, right? Now, a lot of people are doing that in offices, and a lot of people are doing that in, residential thing, but, how it affects prison inmates, for instance, could be a completely unique thing to look at. So again, it doesn't have to be completely different, but suddenly you choose an area that nobody's talking about and it becomes a useful bit of data, right? So that, I think, my main concern with this question would be that it is very crowded. There are a lot of people who are doing that. So find either a specific measure of productivity or a specific type of location, like you said, office, maybe, certain kind of industrial work or something, then you can say, well, how does that affect that? Or even in locational sort of stuff, like we were talking about, tropical regions or whatever, you could sort of say in, certain parts of India, in factories that deal with a certain kind of work, what happens? And suddenly you've got a very specific application of a more general methodology. So I think my suggestion would be to narrow some of that scope to make it a viable project. Yeah.
Thank you. It is a wonderful exercise for us to understand, and I couldn't find the gap there, how to fill it. That is a big question for me. Like,
Yes.
the intersection part of it. Okay. It's a really think process workshop. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Manju. I think we are 1 minute away from 1:30, and I don't want to take it further. So there are 3 more questions. I think Professor Isha and Professor Khushbu, I would definitely send it across to Professor Amit, or they can even get in touch with you, like you have mentioned. And even even Kunal, he's an independent researcher. So I think I'll share your details with them, and they can get in touch with you. Yeah. So yes. So with that, I think we can now conclude the session. It was really engaging, really a good session I hope that the faculties really did take something away from here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time, Professor Amit. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I
Yes.
just wanted to add that it's a tool, and I think it's not a tool that will give you an answer immediately, but it's a tool for having that conversation that we're having. And even now you can sort of see it really starts making you think about that. So please use the tool to kind of, have these discussions with others and kind of see how you can define those. And like I said, we are more than happy to sort of support. So feel free to reach out. And like with my other organization, Patio, also we help develop communities for young academics. So reach out, and if I cannot directly be involved, I can connect you with other people who might be in that same area. So sorry you couldn't go through all of the questions, but hopefully that gives you some insight into how we could do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And so thank you to all the faculty who have taken your time out and attended this session. And we will be now, sharing a feedback form here. My colleague Akshita will be putting a link up in the chat box. Please do fill that up so we know what kind of, topics that we should be coming back with. And it will also help us with the quality of the sessions that we host here. With that, I would conclude. Have a wonderful day and happy teaching to all of you. Thank you, Professor. Bye. We would end the meeting.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.